The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin like a low heartbeat, steady and relentless. Ellie Sullivan pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching the lights of Miami fade into a blur of gold and darkness. Her son Jamie squirmed in her arms, his small fists pressing against her chest in restless protest. He was overtired, hot, and cranky, and she couldn't blame him. The day had been a blur of panic and exhaustion, rushing through security with a stroller that barely fit through the scanner, juggling bottles, diapers, and guilt. Her mother was dying. This flight wasn't a choice. It was a last chance. "Shh, sweetheart," she whispered, rocking him gently, her voice raw with fatigue. The diaper bag at her feet was bursting at the seams, and the seat beside her was still empty. Maybe, she prayed silently, it would stay that way. Maybe, just this once, the universe would grant her peace. A deep voice broke through her thoughts. "Excuse me." She looked up and froze. The man standing in the aisle wasn't just tall. He had presence. His suit was the kind you didn't see outside magazines, the fabric sharp and smooth even under the dim cabin light. His hair was dark, his jaw strong, but it was his eyes that struck her most. Dark, focused, and unsettlingly calm, like he already knew her story before she spoke a word. "I believe that's my seat," he said, nodding toward the space beside her. "Of course," she muttered, fumbling to move the diaper bag and nearly dropping Jamie's bottle. Her fingers trembled as she tried to make room, her exhaustion turning every movement clumsy. As she struggled, Jamie began to cry. Loud, piercing, heart-twisting. A few heads turned, irritated. Ellie's cheeks burned. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the man, though he hadn't complained. Without a word, he bent down and retrieved the bottle before it rolled away. Then, to her surprise, he pulled a pristine handkerchief from his pocket, wiped it clean, and handed it back to her. His movements were deliberate, precise, too composed for a stranger on a cramped flight. "Thank you," she murmured, trying to ignore the sting of embarrassment. He nodded once and sat down, his frame taking up the small space effortlessly. The faint scent of sandalwood and something darker, leather perhaps, settled between them. Not overpowering, but enough to make her heartbeat quicken. The plane rumbled as it began to taxi. Jamie's cries grew louder. Ellie's nerves frayed. She could feel the disapproving stares, the silent judgment. Her hands shook as she tried to test the bottle temperature, and before she knew it, the man beside her spoke again. "May I?" She blinked. "What?" "The bottle," he said simply. "You're about to spill it." Reluctantly, she handed it to him. He tested it on his wrist like he'd done it 1,000 times. "It's fine," he murmured, passing it back. Their fingers brushed, warm, calloused, and steady against her trembling hand. The contrast was startling. Jamie latched onto the bottle immediately, and the crying stopped. Relief flooded Ellie so fast she almost cried herself. "Thank you," she whispered again. He inclined his head slightly but said nothing more. For a moment there was peace. The engines roared, the plane lifted, and the cabin lights dimmed. Jamie's eyelids fluttered closed, his breathing slowing. Ellie exhaled, long and shaky. For the first time in days, her body began to relax. The hum of the engines, the soft vibration of the seat, and the steady warmth radiating from the stranger beside her. All of it pulled her toward sleep. Her head nodded once, then twice. On the third time, it rested against something firm. It took her a moment to realize. His shoulder. Mortified, she jerked awake, whispering, "I'm sorry. It's fine," he said, his voice deep and even. "You need the rest more than I need the space." There was something in his tone. Gentle, almost kind, but commanding all the same. She hesitated, then let herself relax again, too tired to fight it. Minutes or hours passed. Ellie drifted between dreams and half-waking thoughts. The steady rhythm of the engines blended with the warmth of the man beside her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't fighting the world alone. When she finally woke, the cabin lights were dim. The plane was high above the clouds. Jamie slept peacefully in her arms, his tiny mouth open in the innocence of deep sleep. She shifted slightly, realizing with embarrassment that her head still rested against his shoulder. Before she could move, his voice came softly, close enough to make her heart stutter. Our boy slept well. Her breath caught. For a moment, she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. The words were too casual, too intimate, like a claim made in a dream. "What did you say?" she whispered, her pulse rising. But Luca Castellano only looked ahead, eyes dark against the reflection of the cabin light, a faint smile curving his lips. The plane hummed on through the night, carrying them toward a destination that would change everything. The plane touched down with a jolt that made Ellie's heart leap. Jamie stirred against her chest, his tiny hands clutching at her shirt as if sensing the unease that clung to her. She forced herself to breathe, to focus on the practical things, collect the bag, get off the plane, find a cab, reach her mother before it was too late. That was the plan. Simple, predictable, safe. But nothing about the man sitting beside her felt safe. Luca Castellano had been silent during the descent, one hand resting casually on his knee, the other holding a phone he hadn't once looked at. Even seated, he seemed in control of everything around him. When the wheels screeched and the cabin filled with the clatter of seatbelts and chatter, his gaze drifted to Jamie. It wasn't a casual glance. It was focused, assessing, almost protective. Ellie told herself not to look back, not to speak, not to feel the strange energy that hummed between them. Since that moment, he whispered our boy slept well. But when he stood and reached effortlessly for her diaper bag from the overhead bin before she could, her throat tightened. "You don't have to," she began. But he cut her off with a quiet, steady voice. "It's fine. You have your hands full." The way he said it made her stop arguing. He wasn't being polite. He was used to being obeyed. When they stepped into the terminal, the contrast was overwhelming. Bright lights, the buzz of announcements, the smell of coffee and jet fuel mixing into a dizzying blur. Ellie held Jamie close, trying to navigate through the crowd, her backpack slipping from her shoulder. Then she felt it, that subtle prickle on the back of her neck. The sensation of being watched. She turned slightly. Luca was a few steps behind her, his tall frame cutting easily through the chaos. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just followed. "You don't have to wait," she said over her shoulder, her tone sharper than she intended. "I'm not waiting," he replied. "My car is this way." "Your car?" she echoed, startled. "You're heading to Brookhaven, aren't you?" The words stopped her mid-step. Her pulse spiked. She hadn't told him that. Not out loud. She searched her memory in panic, wondering if maybe she'd mentioned it in passing. But no, she was sure she hadn't. "How do you know that?" He gave the smallest of smiles, something dark flickering behind it. "You mentioned it while you were half asleep." Half asleep. Her stomach nodded. What else had she said? "I'll be fine taking a taxi," she said quickly, trying to sound firm. "My mother's expecting me." "At this hour," he said calmly, "you'll wait an hour for a driver and pay more than you can afford. My car's already waiting outside." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. "I don't need help," she snapped. "You already have it," he said simply. That should have made her furious. But instead she felt something else. Confusion, curiosity, an uneasy pull she didn't understand. A man in a dark suit appeared beside Luca, quiet and alert, scanning the terminal with military precision. "Everything is ready, sir," he said in a low voice. "Sir." The title carried weight. Respect. Obedience. Whoever Luca Castellano was, people listened when he spoke. "Thank you, Marco," he replied, his tone smooth, commanding without effort. Marco's gaze flicked briefly to her, then to Jamie. The look wasn't unkind, but it made her skin crawl all the same. "The small blue suitcase with a yellow ribbon," Luca said. "That's yours," Ellie froze. He'd remembered that too. Before she could respond, Marco was already pulling it off the carousel. Luca gestured toward the exit, his hand lightly touching her elbow. The contact sent a jolt through her, heat and warning mixed in equal measure. Outside, the night air was heavy with humidity. A sleek black SUV idled at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the harsh airport lights. "I said I'd take a taxi," she muttered, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "And I said my car is waiting." He replied, "She should have refused." She knew she should. But Jamie was fussing again, his small face scrunching with tired cries, and the thought of wrestling with him in the back of a dirty cab while strangers glared was too much. "Fine," she whispered. "Just to Brookhaven." Luca opened the door himself, his movements smooth and deliberate. "After you, Miss Sullivan." Her heart stopped. She stared at him. She had never told him her last name. "How, your luggage tag," he interrupted smoothly, but she saw it then, the flicker of something behind his eyes. The truth, the calculated calm. The SUV's interior was silent and cool, smelling faintly of leather and something more expensive. The doors closed with a soft final click that sounded like a lock sliding into place. As the car pulled away from the terminal, Ellie stared out the window, clutching Jamie close. The lights of the city blurred past, and with every mile her unease grew heavier. She told herself it was exhaustion, grief, coincidence. But somewhere deep down she knew. This man hadn't just offered her a ride. He was already steering her life. The streets of Brookhaven were almost deserted by the time the SUV slowed to a stop. The quiet suburban houses looked smaller than Ellie remembered, their front porches dimly lit and their paint peeling from too many humid summers. She pressed Jamie closer, his soft breath warm against her neck. The hum of the engine faded, replaced by the steady chirp of crickets and the faint hiss of wind through the trees. For the first time since meeting Luca Castellano, she felt the full weight of where she was headed and who she was sitting beside. "We're here," he said softly. Ellie turned to look at him. Even in the dim light, Luca's face seemed carved from shadow and control. He didn't belong here in this quiet neighborhood. The black SUV, the suited men, the sheer power in his stillness, it was all wrong against the cracked sidewalks and tired lawns. "I'll walk from here," she said quickly, her voice tight, his brow lifted slightly. "It's late, I don't care. I don't want my mother seeing this car or you. She'll think I've lost my mind." Luca studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "As you wish." He rapped once on the glass divider, and the SUV stopped smoothly at the curb, half a block away from her mother's small blue house. Marco stepped out silently and opened the door. The night air rushed in thick and damp. Ellie shifted Jamie in her arms and slid out of the car. She waited for Luca to stay inside, but he followed, his polished shoes crunching softly on the gravel. His height and presence made the narrow street feel smaller, his every movement controlled like a predator who knew the darkness belonged to him. "Thank you for the ride," Ellie said quickly, trying to sound firm, normal. He stepped closer, the glow from the streetlight catching the sharp line of his jaw. "It was my pleasure." Something in the way he said it made her heart stumble. There was no flirtation, no warmth, just a quiet certainty that unsettled her more than any charm could. She turned toward her mother's house, determined to end this strange night. But halfway up the walkway, a flicker of light caught her eye, a small spark from across the street. She froze. A car was parked under a tree, its engine off, its windows tinted. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the ember of a cigarette flared to life, and she saw him, Marco, watching. Her pulse spiked. She turned back to Luca, who was still standing on the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets, as if he had expected this reaction. "He's just ensuring you get inside safely," Luca said quietly. "I don't need a guard," she snapped. "No," he said. "But your son does." His gaze shifted to Jamie, and something unreadable flickered in his eyes, something protective and possessive all at once. "Good night, Ellie. Sleep while you can. Tomorrow will be difficult." The words made her chest tighten. Was it a warning or just strange compassion? She couldn't tell. Luca stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "You did well tonight." "You were brave." The praise caught her off guard. Her throat tightened, and for a second she forgot to breathe. Then his hand moved, almost brushing Jamie's cheek. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, it made her shiver. "Sleep well, little one," he murmured, then looked at Ellie. "Both of you deserve peace." Before she could answer, he turned and walked back to the car. The black SUV pulled away silently, vanishing into the darkness. Ellie stood there for a long moment, gripping Jamie until her arms ached. Her pulse still raced as she forced herself up the steps, fumbling with the old key under the chipped frog-shaped planter. The house was quiet, dim light spilling from the window, her mother's oxygen machine humming faintly inside. But even as she stepped into the safety of home, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek through. The car was still there. Marco's cigarette glowed again like a tiny red eye in the dark. Fear crawled up her spine. Why was he still there? Why hadn't they left? She checked the lock on the door, then checked it again. It clicked softly, useless against the sense that the danger outside wasn't something a bolt could stop. Ellie pressed her back to the wall, heart pounding, and looked down at Jamie. His small face was peaceful, his chest rising and falling against her arm. She forced herself to breathe, to push away the panic clawing at her chest. "You're safe," she whispered to him. "I won't let anyone hurt you." But as she whispered it, she knew it wasn't true. Somewhere out there in the night, a powerful man had decided that she and her baby mattered, and she didn't know if that was the beginning of their salvation or the start of their undoing. Morning light crept through the thin curtains, but it did nothing to chase away the unease that had settled in Ellie's chest. The house felt too still, too quiet. Her mother was asleep in the back room, the faint hum of her oxygen machine the only sign of life. Jamie stirred in his crib, making soft noises, unaware of the tension that lingered in the air like smoke. Ellie moved through the small kitchen on autopilot, making coffee with shaking hands. Every few minutes she looked out the window, expecting to see that dark car again, the one that had been parked under the tree last night. The curb was empty now, but her instincts screamed that they hadn't really gone. People like Luca Castellano didn't just disappear. They watched. They waited. She told herself it didn't matter. She had more important things to worry about. Her mother's condition had worsened overnight, and the doctor had warned her that time was slipping away. The thought was enough to make her chest ache. She grabbed her bag and Jamie's carrier, ready to face another day at the hospital. The knock on the door was soft but precise. 3 short taps. Her heart stopped. For a second she hoped it was a neighbor. Maybe Mrs. Vasquez dropping off food, but deep down she knew. She froze, every instinct screaming to stay still to pretend she wasn't home. Then she heard it. A familiar voice, calm, smooth, with that faint European edge. Ellie. Her stomach turned to ice. How did he know where she lived? Where to find her again? She hadn't given him an address. She barely remembered saying goodbye the night before. The knock came again, slower this time. "It's important," Luca's voice said quietly. "I promise I won't stay long." Against her better judgment, she opened the door just a few inches. He stood on the porch dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, his expression composed but his eyes sharper than before. In his hands he held a bouquet of white lilies. Their scent hit her instantly. Clean, expensive, too perfect for this small, worn-out home. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, keeping the door half closed. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past her shoulder toward the faint sound of her mother's coughing. Then he met her gaze and said, "I came to pay my respects." "Pay your respects? She's not gone yet. That's exactly why I'm here." His tone was calm, steady. "I've arranged for her transfer." Ellie blinked, confused. "Transfer? To a private wing at the hospital. A specialist is being flown in tonight from Johns Hopkins. He'll evaluate her first thing in the morning." She felt the words but couldn't process them. "No, you can't do that. You don't even know her." Luca's gaze didn't waver. "I know what it means to lose someone. I know what it means to wish you'd done more before it was too late." Her throat tightened. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can," he said simply. That answer terrified her more than anything. Power spoken as casually as breathing. He didn't ask permission, didn't negotiate. He just decided. "You had no right," she whispered. He tilted his head slightly. "You said she needed care. I provided it. You can't just come into people's lives and fix things because you feel like it. He stepped closer, his voice low enough that she had to lift her chin to meet his eyes. I didn't come into your life, Ellie. You walked into mine. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Jamie began to cry from the bedroom, his small wail slicing through the tension like a blade. Luca's eyes softened. May I? No, she said quickly, moving to block him. He didn't argue. Instead, he set the lilies on the small table by the door and reached into his jacket. When he pulled out an envelope, she could already see the embossed logo of the hospital. He placed it on the table beside the flowers. All expenses have been covered. A private ambulance will arrive within the hour. This isn't charity, Ellie said sharply. No, it isn't. His gaze darkened. It's investment. The word hit her like a slap. She opened her mouth to speak, but he turned, looking around the small, faded living room. His eyes lingered on a framed photo of her and her mother, taken years ago when laughter had come easily. He touched the corner of the frame lightly, almost reverently. Your son will never have to grow up like this, he said quietly. Ellie felt her pulse quicken. You think you can buy my gratitude? No, he said, his tone soft but edged with steel. I don't need your gratitude. I need your trust. I don't trust you. You will. The words weren't a threat. They were a promise, and that terrified her most of all. He turned toward the door, pausing only once to look back. When you're ready, call me. His voice lowered, almost gentle. But don't wait too long. As soon as he left, Ellie sank to the floor, clutching Jamie to her chest. Through the thin curtains, she saw the sleek black SUV parked across the street again, waiting like a shadow that refused to leave. And for the first time, she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. Luca Castellano wasn't just helping her. He was binding her to him, one favor, one kindness, one impossible debt at a time. Rain fell in a slow, steady rhythm against the hospital window. Ellie sat beside her mother's bed, her fingers laced tightly through her mother's fragile hand, afraid that if she let go, everything holding her together would fall apart. Machines beeped softly in the background, and the faint smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. Her mother's breathing was shallow now, her frail chest rising and falling with painful effort. It had been 2 weeks since Luca Castellano had walked into her life, and nothing felt normal anymore. Her mother's condition had worsened, but somehow they were no longer in the crowded public ward where nurses rushed past without a glance. They were in a private suite with clean sheets, fresh flowers, and quiet. Everything had changed, and she hadn't paid a single cent for it. Luca had. Ellie wanted to hate him for it, but every time she tried, she remembered the way her mother smiled that first night in the new room. The relief in her mother's eyes when the pain subsided after the new medication. The way Luca had appeared in the hallway one evening, silent and respectful, handing Ellie a cup of coffee and saying only, "You look like you haven't slept in days." He was never far, and that was what terrified her. Her mother stirred weakly, her voice a fragile whisper. "He's been good to you, hasn't he?" Ellie hesitated. "He's been kind." "Kind men don't send bodyguards to watch your house," her mother said, eyes half open, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. "You think I don't notice?" Ellie's breath caught. "You've seen them? Every morning. Same car, same man. I may be dying, Ellie, but I'm not blind." Tears burned in her eyes. "He says it's for protection. From what?" She didn't answer, because deep down, she didn't know. That evening, when her mother's breathing slowed to a whisper, Luca appeared again, as if he had known the exact moment to come. He stood in the doorway, dressed in a black suit, his tie undone. There was something different in his eyes, something almost human. "I came to say goodbye," he said softly. Ellie turned, startled. "How did you know?" He didn't answer. He simply stepped forward, his gaze on her mother, then on Ellie. "I've lost someone before," he said quietly. "Sometimes you can feel when it's about to happen." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him to leave, but her legs wouldn't move. Instead, she watched as he knelt beside her mother's bed and gently pressed 2 fingers against the old woman's wrist. His expression didn't change, but his jaw clenched. "She's going," he murmured. "You should hold her hand." Ellie sat down, gripping her mother's hand with both of hers. Her mother's lips moved faintly, forming words Ellie could barely hear. "Take care of the baby. Don't be alone." And then she was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. Ellie bowed her head, trembling, as tears streamed down her face. When she finally lifted her gaze, Luca was still there, standing motionless beside her, his presence heavy and steady like a pillar she didn't want but couldn't ignore. She wiped her face, her voice breaking. "Please, just go." He didn't move. "Grief makes you weak, Ellie. It makes you reach for things you shouldn't. I won't let you fall apart." "You think you can decide that for me?" His gaze softened. "You don't have to do this alone, and what if I want to? Then I'll wait until you realize you can't." The calm certainty in his tone made her heart pound. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. 3 days later, when the funeral ended, the black car appeared again. The driver stepped out and opened the door for her, but it wasn't Marco this time. It was Luca himself. The rain had returned, soft but relentless. He didn't use an umbrella. "You shouldn't be here," Ellie said quietly, standing by the gate. "I told you I'd make sure you weren't alone," he replied. "You've done enough. Not yet." He reached into his coat and handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a simple silver ring with a single diamond that caught the dim light. Her heart stopped. "What is this?" "A promise." "Luca, no, it's not a question, Ellie. It's what comes next." She stared at him, unable to breathe. "This isn't love, no," he said, his voice low. "It's something deeper. It's what happens when you lose everything and decide never to lose again." Lightning flickered above them, thunder rumbling in the distance. She stood there trembling, caught between fear and something she couldn't name. "I don't want this," she whispered. He stepped closer until his breath brushed her skin. "Maybe not yet, but you will." The rain poured harder, soaking them both, and for a moment, as she looked into his eyes, Ellie realized something far more dangerous than love was happening. Luca Castellano wasn't asking for her heart. He was claiming it, one piece at a time. The sound of rain had become the rhythm of Ellie's nights. It was always raining now, or maybe it just felt that way, endless, gray, heavy. Her mother was gone, and silence filled every corner of her house like a ghost that wouldn't leave. She had stopped answering the door, stopped checking her phone, but somehow fresh flowers still arrived every morning. White lilies, always lilies. She didn't need to check the card to know who sent them. Luca Castellano. She had told herself she wouldn't see him again, that she'd cut whatever invisible thread connected them. But the world had a way of pulling her back to him. It started 3 nights after the funeral. She had been standing at the sink, washing a bottle for Jamie, when she saw movement outside the window. A flash of black, a reflection in the glass. Her chest tightened. Before she could move, a knock came at the door, steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore. When she opened it, he was standing there, no suit this time, just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled, rain dripping from his hair onto the collar. For the first time, he looked less like a billionaire and more like something dangerous that didn't belong in the ordinary world. "You shouldn't be here," she said, clutching the door. "And yet I am." His tone was calm, but there was something beneath it, a quiet storm barely held back. He stepped closer, his eyes flicking past her to where Jamie slept in his crib. "I need to talk to you, Ellie. About what? About what comes next." She almost laughed, but it came out bitter. "There is no next. You helped me when I needed it, and I'll never forget that. But now it's over." He stared at her for a long moment, then said softly, "You think this ends because you say so." Her breath caught. "You can't control me." "No," he said, "but I can protect you. I don't need protecting." His jaw tightened. "Then tell me why there was a car parked outside your house all afternoon." Her stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" He handed her his phone. On the screen was a blurry photo, her driveway, her window, and a black sedan parked half a block away. "Someone's been watching you," he said quietly. "Not my men." Ellie's knees weakened. "Who?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but I will find out." She wanted to argue, to tell him he was lying, but the fear in her chest was too real. She had seen that same car once before, a week ago outside the hospital. Luca stepped inside without asking, his presence filling the small living room like smoke. "I told you," he said softly. "Grief makes you vulnerable. People notice that. People take advantage. This isn't your problem," she said. But her voice was trembling. He turned to face her. "It became my problem the moment you fell asleep on that plane." The words made her heart race. "Why do you care so much? You don't even know me." He took a step closer. His eyes darkened. "You don't understand, Ellie. You were never a stranger." She froze. "What do you mean?" He looked away, almost as if he regretted saying it. "I'll tell you when it's time. For now, I need you and Jamie somewhere safe. I'm not leaving my home." He exhaled slowly, then pulled a folded document from his coat pocket and set it on the table. "This isn't a request." Her hands shook as she opened it. "Property transfer papers. A new house. Her name already signed." "Luca, this is insane." "It's done," he interrupted. "You'll move tomorrow morning. My men will help. I won't take your money." "It's not money," he said softly. "It's safety." She tried to speak, but before she could, Jamie began to cry. Luca crossed the room before she could stop him. He picked up the baby with surprising ease, his movements gentle, his voice low and steady. "Shh, Piccolo," he murmured. "You're safe." Jamie calmed instantly, small fingers gripping Luca's shirt. Ellie's throat tightened. "You have no right," she whispered. He met her eyes, and for a moment, the steel in his voice cracked. "You're right. I don't. But I'm doing it anyway." He handed Jamie back to her, his expression unreadable. "Tomorrow you'll move, and you'll take the ring." "What ring?" He reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table. "I told you, Ellie. It's not love yet. It's protection." She stared at the box as if it were poison. "I won't marry you." "You already said yes," he replied quietly. "You just haven't realized it." The rain grew louder, hammering against the roof like warning drums. Luca stepped back toward the door, his shadow stretching across the floor. "Sleep tonight," he said. "In the morning, everything changes." And when the door closed behind him, Ellie felt her whole world tilt. Because part of her wanted to run, but another part, a small, dangerous part, wondered what he meant when he said she had never been a stranger. Ellie woke before sunrise to the sound of engines outside her house. Her first thought was fear, pure and sharp. She rushed to the window and froze. 3 black SUVs stood lined up on the street, their tinted windows glinting in the pale dawn light. Men in dark coats moved in silence, efficient and fast, loading boxes she hadn't packed. Her clothes, Jamie's toys, even her mother's photo from the mantel. She ran to the front door, flinging it open. "Stop! What are you doing?" A tall man turned toward her, his face unreadable. "Orders from Mr. Castellano, ma'am. We're taking you to your new residence." "I didn't agree to this," she said, her voice breaking. Luca's voice came from behind her. "You didn't need to." She spun around. He stood in the doorway, perfectly composed, wearing a dark coat over a charcoal suit. His calmness made her angrier than shouting ever could. "You can't just steal my life," she said. His eyes softened, but his tone didn't. "I'm not stealing it. I'm saving it. From what?" she snapped. "From myself? From the people watching you." He stepped aside and gestured toward the end of the street. 2 men in a black sedan were parked there, cameras in their hands. The moment they saw her looking, they drove off. Her stomach turned cold. "Who were they?" "Reporters," he said quietly, "or worse. People who think your connection to me means leverage." "I don't have a connection to you," she said quickly. He tilted his head. "Then why are they watching your son?" Ellie's breath caught. She clutched Jamie closer, her heart racing. Luca's expression softened slightly. "Please," he said quietly. "Come with me. Let me keep you safe. You don't even know what that word means." "Maybe not," he said, stepping closer. "But I'm trying." He reached out as if to touch her shoulder, but stopped himself. The restraint in that small motion made something shift inside her. Against all logic, she nodded. The ride was silent. The city blurred past as the convoy moved through back streets and tunnels. When they emerged again, the skyline had changed. This wasn't Brookhaven anymore. This was New York. Sharper, louder, alive with secrets. The car stopped in front of a glass tower that shimmered like smoke. The guard at the gate bowed as they passed. The elevator ride felt endless, the air thick with unspoken things. When the doors opened, she stepped into a penthouse so vast it didn't feel real. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and marble floors gleamed beneath crystal light. "This is not my world," she whispered. "It is now," Luca said. Jamie started fussing, and before she could react, a woman appeared from another room. A nurse, young and polite, greeting Ellie as if she already knew her. "This is Ms. Daniels," Luca said. "She'll help with Jamie while you rest." "I don't need help." "You do," he said softly. "You just won't admit it." She turned to face him, anger rising again. "You can buy everything, can't you? Even people." He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I can't buy what I really want. What's that? Peace." The honesty in his tone caught her off guard. For a moment, he didn't look like a man who owned half the city. He looked lost. That night, Ellie lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the city below. Jamie slept soundly beside her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something in this place was watching her. When she finally got up and walked down the long hallway, she saw a door slightly open at the end. A faint light spilled out. She hesitated, then pushed it wider. Luca sat inside a dim study, sleeves rolled, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. Papers covered the desk, photos, maps, documents. But what froze her blood was the photograph pinned in the center. It was her. Holding Jamie at the airport, her voice trembled. "You were following me." He looked up slowly. "Yes, why?" "Because I couldn't risk losing you again." "Again?" she repeated, her pulse racing. He stood, his shadow stretching across the floor. "There's a reason I was on that flight, Ellie. You weren't a coincidence. You were the answer to something I've been searching for." She took a step back, fear mixing with confusion. "What are you talking about?" He moved closer, his voice low, almost broken. 10 years ago, someone saved my sister's life. A woman. She disappeared before I could thank her. And what does that have to do with me?" He met her eyes, and for a moment, all his control cracked. "It was you," Ellie froze. Her mind spun, fragments of memory flickering like lightning. Blood, a car crash, a terrified girl pulling someone from the wreck. She had buried that night long ago, too painful to remember. He stepped closer, voice trembling for the first time. "You saved her, Ellie, and I swore if I ever found you again, I'd protect you for the rest of my life." She wanted to speak, but her throat refused to work. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he's afraid to lose. "You think this is about control, but it's not. It's about debt, and I always pay mine." Before she could respond, the sound of glass shattering echoed from the far end of the penthouse. Luca turned instantly, his voice sharp and cold. "Stay here." He moved faster than she thought possible, pulling a gun from the drawer as men rushed in from the hallway. Ellie clutched Jamie and backed against the wall, her heart pounding, and for the first time, she realized she hadn't just stepped into Luca's world. She was already in the middle of it. The sound of shattered glass still echoed through the penthouse as Luca disappeared down the dark corridor. Ellie stood frozen, clutching Jamie to her chest, her pulse thundering in her ears. Voices rose from beyond the hall, low, sharp, filled with danger. She heard footsteps, the metallic click of a weapon, then silence. The lights flickered once, twice, and went out completely. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. She moved toward the corner, trying to keep Jamie quiet. Every muscle in her body trembled. Somewhere in the distance, she heard a man groan, followed by a heavy thud. Then Luca's voice, cold, deadly, unrecognizable. "You made a mistake coming here." Ellie pressed her back to the wall, clutching her baby tighter. She wanted to run, to hide, to wake up from this nightmare. But she couldn't move. Every instinct screamed that stepping into that hallway meant walking into something she could never unsee. Then, footsteps again, slower this time, firm, controlled. The door creaked open, and Luca appeared, his shirt torn, a streak of blood running down his temple. His breathing was steady, but his eyes were darker than she'd ever seen. "It's over," he said quietly. "What happened?" she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Someone found out you're here. Who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the window, looking down at the glittering city below. The skyline reflected in his eyes like fire. Finally, he spoke. "There are people who want to hurt me, Ellie. They'll use anything, anyone, to get close enough." She felt her stomach twist. "So I'm a target because of you." He turned, his expression softening. "You're a target because you matter to me." The words made her chest tighten. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part, stronger, older, wiser, knew that nothing about this man was simple. She took a step closer. "Who were they?" He hesitated, then said, "Rivals. Men I used to work with. They think taking you or the boy gives them leverage." Ellie's voice trembled. "Then we need to leave." He shook his head slowly. "No. Running only makes them chase harder. So what now?" He met her gaze, calm but unyielding. "You stay here. You don't leave this floor without me. And you don't open the door for anyone. Luca, promise me." The command in his voice froze her. She nodded, even as her fear grew heavier. That night, sleep didn't come. The city outside never seemed to rest, and neither did she. Somewhere past midnight, she heard Luca talking in the next room, his tone low but urgent. She crept to the door and pressed her ear against it. Marco's voice was faint but clear. "We found the one who talked. He was paid by someone named Vieri." Luca's reply came like a knife. "Handle it. And the woman?" Marco asked, a pause. Then Luca said, "She stays. She's not ready to know everything." Ellie stepped back from the door, her mind spinning. She's not ready to know everything. What did that mean? What else was he hiding? The next morning, Luca was gone. No message, no explanation. Just a note on the kitchen counter that read, "Stay inside." Hours passed. The walls of the penthouse felt like a cage. Every sound made her jump. The hum of the elevator, the creak of the floor, the distant rumble of thunder. When night fell, she couldn't take it anymore. She wrapped Jamie in a blanket and stepped into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder and rain. She followed the corridor to Luca's study, hoping to find answers. Inside, the desk was still covered in documents and maps. But now there was something new, a file with her name on it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photos of her old house, her mother's medical records, even her work history from years ago. There was also a single page with words that made her knees buckle. Surveillance initiated after incident. Subject identified as E. Sullivan. Connection confirmed. She didn't understand it at first. Then she saw a date written at the bottom. 9 years ago. 9 years. Before the flight, before her mother's illness, before any of this, he had been watching her for almost a decade. The door behind her creaked. She turned, heart hammering, and there he was, Luca, standing in the doorway. His shirt was wet from the rain, his eyes unreadable. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said quietly. Her voice shook. "How long?" He stepped closer. "Since the night you saved my sister. You've been following me for 9 years, protecting you. That's not protection. That's obsession." He stopped in front of her, his voice low and steady. "You don't understand what that night cost me, what it did to me." She backed away, holding the file like a shield. "You should have left me alone." He moved closer, his eyes filled with something raw and dangerous. "I couldn't. Why?" she whispered. "Because I've already lost one woman I loved," he said softly. "I won't lose another." The air between them felt electric, too heavy to breathe. Before she could speak, a phone on his desk began to ring. Luca answered it, his expression shifting instantly to steel. "Say that again," he demanded. Marco's voice came through faintly. "Sir, they took the bait, but they're coming for her now." Ellie's blood ran cold. Luca turned to her, his voice low but fierce. "Pack what you need. We leave tonight. Where are we going?" "Somewhere they can't find you." She looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she saw something more terrifying than danger, destiny. Because no matter where they went, she knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about a man who had built his whole life around her without her ever knowing, the city outside, burned with rain and red lights as Luca guided the car through the storm. The streets were nearly empty, washed in a haze of thunder and water. but Ellie could feel the danger pressing in from all sides. Jamie slept in her arms, unaware that their lives were being rewritten one heartbeat at a time. Luca's jaw was tense, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. "To the only place they won't follow," he replied. "And who are they, Luca? You keep saying enemies, rivals, ghosts from your past, but I deserve the truth." He didn't answer immediately. The sound of the rain filled the silence between them until finally, he said, "They're people who believe the world owes them, people who took my family from me, people who don't stop until everything you love is gone." Ellie's grip tightened around Jamie. "And what makes you so different?" Luca glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I stopped pretending the world was fair. That's the only difference." They drove for hours, leaving the city behind, the skyline fading into black hills and wet roads. When the car finally stopped, Ellie saw an old mansion on the edge of a forest. Its stone walls glistened under the storm, tall iron gates standing open as if waiting. "This is your safe house?" she asked. "No," he said softly. "This is my past." Inside, the mansion was dim, its hallways echoing with the sound of rain against glass. Every surface smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. A portrait hung at the top of the stairs, a woman with kind eyes holding a child. "Is that your wife?" Ellie asked, her voice low. Luca stopped beside the painting. "My wife and my son." She hesitated, the air between them heavy. "What happened to them?" He looked up at the portrait for a long time before speaking. "They were killed in an explosion meant for me. I wasn't there to stop it." The pain in his voice was quiet, almost invisible, but it was real. "I swore it would never happen again," he continued. "Not to anyone I could protect." Ellie wanted to hate him, but her heart ached instead. "You can't protect everyone, Luca." He turned to face her. "I can protect you. That's not love," she whispered. "That's fear." His eyes darkened. "Maybe, but fear keeps people alive." Before she could answer, a crash echoed from somewhere deep in the mansion. Both turned sharply. Luca's hand went to his side, pulling a gun from his jacket. "Stay here," he ordered. "No," she said, clutching Jamie. "Not again." He looked at her, and for a second the mask of control slipped. "Stay close, then." They moved through the hall, shadows flickering across the walls as the storm raged outside. The noise came again, a door creaking open, footsteps moving fast. Luca turned the corner, gun raised, and froze. A man stood in the foyer, soaked to the bone, his hands raised. "Don't shoot, Luca." Luca's voice dropped to ice. "Vieri." Ellie recognized the name, the one she'd overheard in Luca's calls. The man smiled faintly. "You didn't think I'd let you disappear with her, did you? What do you want?" Luca demanded. Vieri's gaze shifted to Ellie and Jamie, her, and the boy, over my dead body. "That can be arranged." The flash of the gunfire was blinding. The sound tore through the air, making Jamie cry out. Ellie dropped to the floor, shielding him as splinters and glass shattered above her. Luca returned fire, each shot precise, controlled. Vieri ducked behind a pillar, laughing darkly. "You're slipping, old friend," he shouted. "Love makes you weak." Luca moved closer, his voice like thunder. "No, it makes me dangerous." The next shot was louder, sharper. Vieri fell. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Luca stood still for a long moment, breathing heavily. Then he lowered the gun, blood running from a cut above his eye. Ellie watched him, her heart pounding. He turned toward her slowly, his voice softer now. "You see why I can't let you go? The world I come from doesn't forgive. You can't trap me to save me, Luca," she said. "That's not how this works." He stepped closer. "It's the only way I know." His voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Every time I try to walk away, something pulls me back." "You." Ellie's throat tightened. "You don't own me." He smiled faintly. "No, but you own me." For a moment, the storm outside felt quieter, like the world itself had paused. But then Jamie started crying again, his small voice cutting through the stillness. Luca knelt, reaching out gently to calm him, his large hand trembling. The sight broke something inside Ellie. She saw it then, not the ruthless man the world feared, but a broken soul trying to rebuild his heart through the only thing he understood: control. The lights flickered again. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed shut on its own. Ellie looked up, startled. "Did you hear that?" Luca stood quickly, gun in hand. "We're not alone." Before she could speak, another voice echoed through the dark hallway. A woman's voice, cold and familiar. "Hello, Luca." He froze. His face drained of color. Ellie watched as a tall figure stepped out of the shadows, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The resemblance to the portrait on the wall was unmistakable. Luca whispered her name like a prayer he'd buried long ago at Isabella, and then Ellie realized the truth. The wife he said was dead was standing right there, alive, and smiling. "Welcome home," she said. "I see you've replaced me." The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels alive. The rain outside had stopped, but thunder still rolled far in the distance. Luca stared at the woman standing before him like he was seeing a ghost he had spent years trying to forget. Ellie held Jamie close, her heart racing so fast it hurt. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Luca," she said. He didn't move. His voice was low, almost hoarse. "I buried you." "You tried," she replied softly. "But the dead don't stay dead when revenge is unfinished." Ellie's fingers tightened around Jamie. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel the air twisting between them like a wire ready to snap. Luca took a slow step forward. How Isabella's expression darkened. "You should know, my love. You paid for the explosion that didn't kill me." "That's not true," he said through clenched teeth. "You know who did that." She tilted her head. "Vieri, he was just a pawn. You were the one who gave the order. You wanted me gone because I was becoming a threat." Luca's jaw tightened. "You were dealing weapons to the same people who murdered our son. Don't twist this." Ellie's stomach turned as she realized this wasn't a simple reunion. This was unfinished war. Isabella's eyes flicked toward her. "And who is she? The replacement?" Luca's voice was sharp. "Don't speak to her," but Isabella only smiled, walking closer. Her heels echoed against the marble floor, every step deliberate. She stopped just in front of Ellie, her gaze landing on the sleeping baby in her arms. "He's beautiful. What's his name?" Ellie stepped back. "Don't touch him." Luca moved instantly, putting himself between them. "You take one more step, and this ends tonight." Isabella laughed, a soft, haunting sound. "You think you can protect her the way you couldn't protect me? The way you couldn't protect our child?" The words hit him like a knife. His composure cracked for the first time. "Stop," he said, his voice breaking. "You built an empire out of guilt," she continued, "and now you've found a new woman to heal you. But what happens when she learns what you really are?" Ellie looked at him, her breath catching. "What is she talking about?" Luca didn't answer. His silence said more than any words could. "Tell her," Isabella whispered. "Tell her what happened the night of the fire. Tell her who really started it." Luca's hands trembled. "You were smuggling explosives through my docks. I tried to stop you. You turned on me." Isabella's voice dropped to a whisper. "I did it because you killed our son first." The world seemed to stop spinning. Ellie's mind reeled. Jamie whimpered in her arms, sensing her fear. Luca's eyes filled with something raw. Pain, denial, maybe even truth. "That's not true," he said, his voice trembling. He was caught in the crossfire. "You know that," Isabella smiled sadly. "You can't wash blood away, Luca. Not even with love." She reached into her coat. Luca's reaction was instinct. He grabbed Ellie, pushing her behind him just as a gun flashed in Isabella's hand. The sound exploded through the hall. Ellie screamed as the bullet shattered glass inches from Luca's shoulder. He fired back once, his face pale, his movements mechanical. The shot hit Isabella square in the chest. Time slowed. She looked down at the wound, a strange calmness in her eyes. For a moment she almost smiled. "You never miss," she whispered. Then she fell. Luca dropped the gun. The room was filled with the echo of her fall and the smell of smoke. Ellie stood frozen, her breath coming in sharp bursts. He didn't move toward the body. He just stood there, staring at the floor like he had finally reached the edge of his own world. "She came for you," Ellie whispered. "She came to destroy you." "No," he said softly. "She came to finish what I started." He turned to her then, and for the first time, she saw the man beneath the power, the broken, haunted soul who had built his empire from ashes. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I just need you to understand. Everything I did, every wall I built, every sin I carried, it was all to protect what I thought I could never have again." "And what's that?" she asked, family. Tears blurred her vision. She looked at him, at the man who had both saved her and destroyed her peace. And for the first time, she didn't know whether to hate him or hold him. Police sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Luca turned toward the sound, his voice quiet. "You need to leave. I'm not going without you." He looked at her, and something in his eyes broke completely. "You have to. No," she whispered. "I won't." He walked to her, gently placing his hand over Jamie's small head. His touch was soft, trembling. Then he leaned in close and whispered, "Take care of our boy." Before she could speak, he stepped away, walking back toward Isabella's still body. The lights from the police cars painted the walls red and blue as they flashed through the windows. Ellie stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to scream, to drag him out, to make him run, but she knew he wouldn't. Luca Castellano didn't run from ghosts. He faced them. The doors burst open, and the sound of orders and gunfire filled the air. She held Jamie tight, forcing herself to turn away, her heart breaking with every step. Outside, the rain began again, washing over the stone steps as she walked into the storm. Hours later, when the first light of morning touched the sky, she stood at a small cafe on the edge of the city. Jamie slept peacefully in her arms, unaware of the world they had escaped. The television behind the counter showed the news. A mansion fire, 1 dead, 1 missing. Ellie closed her eyes. She didn't need to see the rest. Months passed. The city healed, as it always does. Ellie opened a small bookstore by the sea, her days filled with quiet and the scent of paper and rain. Jamie grew, his laughter filling every corner of her new life. But sometimes, when the wind shifted and the tide was high, she could swear she saw a tall man in a dark coat standing at the end of the pier, watching them from afar. He never spoke, never came closer. He only watched, and in those moments Ellie knew that Luca Castellano was still alive, haunted, hiding, but alive, because love that dangerous never dies. It simply waits in the shadows, guarding what it could never let go.